Well, the United Nations now expected to discuss the ICJ ruling against Israel sometime this week. Professor Anthoni van Nieuwkerk is a Professor of International Relations at Unisa. Professor, good afternoon to you and thank you for your time today. We all know Israel will not obey the order of the court. It's made that very clear. It is strongly supported by countries like the US, the UK, Germany. Does this order have implications for them too?
I would think so, Stephen. Yes, indeed. Because Israel cannot do what it's doing in Gaza and the West Bank without the active support, militarily, politically, diplomatically, and economically, from particularly the Biden administration and then key players in the European Union, the EU itself, but also significant countries inside the EU. So my reading of the court's judgment is that if the interim relief measures are to be implemented properly and reported on, then it's affecting Israel as well as its supporters elsewhere in the world. But whether the Security Council of the United Nations will be able to declare this as an issue to be enforced is another question altogether.
Well, that's the issue then. I mean, it does mean that is the US likely once again to use its veto at the Security Council, and we're kind of back to where we always are.
Unfortunately, my reading of the dynamics of the Security Council over a period of time is that it's not really an instrument to be used to advance the cause of peace and international justice, unfortunately, because it's dominated by the superpowers or the great powers. And there's a standoff inside the Security Council, which is a standoff between the global north and the global south, if you want. So you've got the Americans and the French and the British on the one side, and you've got Russia and China on the other side. And they don't like what each other is doing. In fact, there's a competition, in my view, for dominance and the reshaping of world order. And the UN Security Council becomes an instrument, a very cynical, use of the Security Council to push certain agendas. So the court, unfortunately, has limited impact on whether a real change can happen in Gaza.
So you've suggested, if I've understood a piece you've written correctly, that one of the reasons the situation in the Middle East is changing so quickly at the moment is because of the sort of change in the global order. So, of course, there was sort of Western dominance, NATO, backed up by the United States, if you like. When you suggest that the world is changing, the world order is changing, are you suggesting a stronger role for countries like China in the Middle East?
Yeah, indeed. My argument in the piece that you referred to, the essay that I wrote in the conversation, says that in this period of a transition from the old to the new, where the new consists of an emerging power block of BRICS, an enlarged BRICS alliance, many more, but symptoms are let loose, and instability is the nature of the international environment at the moment, from Ukraine to the Middle East. And possibly, other flashpoints that will come up this year and even later. Taiwan is another example. The inability of this system, to assist Africa with wars in the DRC and Sudan, and the world international community is attracted to Africa precisely because of the valuable assets that we have. In this context, I think this BRICS Plus alliance, led by China very much, I think it's the natural leader of the enlarged BRICS alliance, is making its voice known and heard and will enter the Middle East conflagration at some point, maybe not immediately, because I think what the Chinese are doing is they're waiting for others to make diplomatic moves and to create the conditions for a peace process that can be anchored by a very powerful counter-American hegemonic power, and that is none other than China.
That obviously has huge implications for everyone, and particularly Israel.
That is correct. And then, in addition, a colleague of mine, in response to the essay, said, but don't you think, Anthoni, that the West might make another strategic calculation, which is why not move back a little bit from this blind support for Israel, because is it worth putting your money and energy, like in Ukraine, in Israel, because the pressure points will come up elsewhere. It's perhaps more important to preserve the unity of the EU or NATO from a European perspective, from a Western perspective, rather than putting all its eggs and support into into Israel. And in fact, I can see as the world changes in front of our eyes, new alliances, the Arab states, for example, working with BRICS, but also with the EU in terms of safety, security and trade, might become a feature of this new world order that we see unfolding in front of our eyes.
Professor, at the same time, we have several new sides to this conflict. So just yesterday, 3 U.S. soldiers were killed by attacks coming from groups supported by Iran yesterday. And I'm reminded, as I say that American lives always get far more prominence than others. We have the Houthi conflict in the Red Sea, firing on shipping there. We have Iran and Pakistan firing missiles, not directly at each other, but certainly at each other's territory. If Israel stopped its invasion in Gaza, would that stop all of this, or not necessarily?
Yeah, no, not necessarily. I mean, so for example, on this tension between Iran and Pakistan, I see the foreign ministers have met today or yesterday, or there's sort of a de-escalation of tension. The Houthis have taken sides in Yemen and constitute a real threat to shipping, and they have, as small as they are, with limited resources, have shown how fragile, international peace and security is. Forcing NATO and other players, including the Chinese and the Arab states, to make sure that their assets in the Indian Ocean, the Red Sea, the Horn of Africa is sort of protected. So I think if Israel draws down, slows down, opens up the door for a negotiated settlement, perhaps without Netanyahu, a new leader, possibly, it'll cool down the tensions in the Middle East, which I think at this point, almost everybody except that very right-wing fanatical government in Israel desperately wants.
Professor Anthoni van Nieuwkerk, Professor of International Relations at Unisa, really do appreciate the time today.